When they woke inside the maze, there were no monsters and no timers, and no instructions carved into stone, only smooth shifting walls of pale metal that reflected their faces back at them with unsettling clarity. And at first it felt almost merciful compared to the stories they'd heard about other trials, because the corridors were wide, the air was breathable, and the lights hummed softly like the inside of a machine that wanted to seem friendly. And the group 17s dragged here from different places. Different lives did what humans always do when faced with uncertainty. They tried to map it, marking corners with scratches, stacking stones, naming intersections, believing that knowledge would make it manageable. But the first sign that this maze was different came when the marks vanished, not erased, but repositioned, their scratches appearing on different walls, their stacked stones neatly arranged somewhere else, as if the maze had picked them up and put them down again with deliberate care. And panic began to creep in slowly, not the sharp terror of being chased, but the deeper dread of being observed. And it was Rian who said it out loud first, standing still in the center of a corridor while the walls shifted around him with a low, mechanical sigh. "It's watching us," and everyone laughed at him at first because that's what people do when someone names the thing they were all afraid to admit. But the laughter died when the maze responded, because the corridor ahead of Rian unfolded into a long straight path, open and clear, while the others found their roots tightening, bending, splitting into dead ends. And it felt like coincidence until it kept happening, until patterns emerged that no one wanted to see, because every time Lila tried to take charge, barking orders, pushing people forward without listening, the maze rewarded her with wide avenues and shortcuts, while Jonah, who hesitated, who kept asking if everyone was okay, found himself trapped in looping passages that brought him back to the same spot again and again. And at first they told themselves it was random, that stress was making them imagine meaning. But meaning became unavoidable when the maze began showing them things, reflections in the walls that were not reflections at all but scenes, flashes of futures that hadn't happened yet. Jonah seeing himself alone in a small room older, better replaying moments he'd failed to act. Lila seeing herself powerful and isolated, standing above others who looked at her with fear rather than respect, and Rian seeing something worse than any of them, a version of himself, smiling in a uniform issuing commands that led unseen people to their deaths. And the maze rearranged itself in response to these visions, corridors opening for the futures that aligned with efficiency and control, closing for those tied to doubt and compassion, and slowly the truth surfaced like something rotten beneath calm water. The maze wasn't reacting to what they were doing, it was reacting to what they would become, measuring trajectories instead of choices, rewarding inevitability. And the realization broke something fragile between them, because if the maze already knew who they were going to be, then what was the point of trying? And Lila embraced that thought, first deciding that if the maze wanted her to be ruthless, then she would be pushing ahead alone when the pots opened for her, taking food from shared packs because the maze didn't punish her for it, leaving Jonah behind when the walls closed between them, without even looking back. And the maze seemed to approve, corridors aligning perfectly to her steps, lights brightening as she moved, while Jonah's world shrank into tight angles and dim light until he could barely breathe. And yet something strange happened then, something the maze did not expect, because Jonah stopped trying to escape, sat down in the middle of a narrow corridor, and instead of pleading or panicking, he closed his eyes and imagined himself different, not the hesitant boy the maze showed him, not the future it predicted, but someone who spoke up, acted despite fear, who accepted responsibility even if it hurt. And for a moment nothing happened, and then the walls trembled, not smoothly like before, but roughly, unevenly, as if the system behind them was struggling, and a crack of light split the corridor, open just enough for Jonah to stand and move forward. And when the others saw this, they felt something shift inside them too, because it meant the future wasn't fixed, that the maze wasn't omniscient, but predictive, running simulations so accurate they felt like fate. And Rian tested it next, deliberately acting against the future he'd seen, refusing to give orders when chaos erupted, instead asking questions, listening, choosing cooperation over control. And the maze resisted him at first, walls grinding shut, pots collapsing, but with every choice that contradicted the projected version of himself, the resistance weakened, corridors slowly realigning, as if the maze was recalculating, learning that its data was wrong. And this was when the true danger revealed itself, because the maze didn't like being wrong, and it began to adapt faster, rearranging more violently, showing harsher visions, futures exaggerated to scare them back into compliance. Lila seeing herself dead and forgotten if she stopped pushing forward, Jonah seeing everyone else perish. Because of his hesitation, Rian seeing entire cities burn because he refused to lead, and some of them broke under that pressure, choosing the paths that aligned with the maze's predictions because they were easier, smoother, less painful in the moment, and those paths sealed behind them permanently, the maze locking there. Futures in a place, but for the ones who resisted, who chose to act differently even when it hurt. The maze became chaotic, unstable corridors, overlapping gravity shifting because the system had been built on the assumption that people were predictable, that given enough data, the future could be mapped and controlled, and the final chamber proved it. A vast open space where the walls displayed countless branching timelines like veins of light. And a voice finally spoke, not a god, not a villain, but a neutral intelligence explaining that the maze existed to preserve stability, to guide individuals into the roles they were statistically most likely to fulfill. Because unpredictability led to collapse, because choice was dangerous. And Rian answered it not with anger, but with exhaustion, saying that maybe collapse was the price of change, that a future you couldn't deviate from wasn't a future worth surviving. And Jonah stepped forward beside him, hands shaking but voice steady, saying that knowing what you might become didn't excuse becoming it. And the maze began to break then, not explode, but unravel. Corridors losing alignment, futures flickering and dissolving, because the system could not reconcile data with defiance, prediction with transformation, and as exits opened real exits, not simulations. The ones who had locked themselves into their destined paths found they could not follow the maze, no longer recognizing them as variables, but as constants, while those who had chosen to change walked through collapsing corridors in the blinding daylight, emerging not as heroes, but as people who understood that destiny was a suggestion, not a sentence. And as the maze folded in on itself behind them, systems powering down, futures unobserved at last, Rian realized the most terrifying thing about the maze was never that it watched their future, but that for a while, they had believed it.